7 years ago, when I was 11 years old, I became very passionate about bioethanol. Bioethanol is a form of biofuel that one day could power the vehicles that we drive. I remember growing up and being absolutely enamored with science of all shapes and sizes. And my father himself was a scientist. He makes medicine, he makes new drug delivery systems, and some of the fondest days of my childhood were the days that my father would take me to his office. And I remember sitting in his office and watching the scientists at his office work, and it was just fascinating to me. It was magical. These scientists would take two chemicals, mix them together into a test tube, and something magical would happen. They would combust, they would react, they would heat up, they would change colors. And beyond that, they could take whatever they mixed in this test tube and actually create something which could one day cure cancer, which could affect the lives of millions of people, all from work that they were doing in a lab. And I knew when I was 10 years old that I wanted to work in a lab. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I wasn't interested in games and sports. I wanted to work in a lab. And I remember when I was in 7th grade and I had just turned 11, I started making that a reality. And I remember emailing every single professor in the upstate New York area. I was living in the upstate New York area. And sending them the most childish email I have ever sent. And I remember, I look back at it and it's very childish. It's big letters, it's red and blue alternating colors. And I sent an email to all of them explaining who I was, explaining that I was 11 years old and that I would work for free, but I just wanted to work with them. I wanted the honor of working in their lab, and I would do whatever they wanted. And I sent about 300 of these emails, and I remember receiving 4 responses. The first 3 were very negative. Professors emailed me back saying, there's a law in New York State that you have to be 16 years old in order to work in a wet lab. And since you're 11 years old, why don't you try again in 5 years? And the 4th professor emailed me back, Dr. David Wu from the University of Rochester, who apparently didn't know this rule. And he emailed me back and he described to me the world of biofuels. He told me that his lab was focusing on working on a product called bioethanol, something I had never heard of. But he said that I could spend 3 weeks working in his lab, and over the next 3 weeks, if I could come up with a reason why I was interested in the global energy crisis, and why I should make strides in the global energy crisis to solve it, if I could come up with a specific project proposal on how to create ethanol from cellulose in a very cheap fashion, that I could spend maybe a year or 2 years working in his lab. And those 3 weeks actually ended up turning into 5.5 years. A few pictures of me from a young age working. In those 5.5 years, I realized that the United States government had spent about $200 billion on innovating energy, from solar panels to wind energy to geothermal energy. But hardly any resources were being dedicated to biofuels. And that stunned me. That absolutely stunned me. There's 1 billion vehicles on the road today. We just hit an unprecedented 1 billion vehicles on the road. And the fossil energy to run those vehicles is going down. And so if we pick any form of alternative energy, it was natural that it should be a form of energy that has a seamless transition from the current infrastructure that we have. And for me, that was liquid energy, like biofuels. And so it amazed me that literally no resources were being dedicated to actually producing these biofuels, and I made it my mission to change that. Bioethanol is produced from something called cellulose. Cellulose is any carbon-based structure found in nature. It's all around you. You guys are holding it. It's grass, paper, trees. We waste 2 billion tons of cellulose every single year. And it amazed me that none of this was ever being studied, because the current production to ethanol was about $5 per gallon. There's a 2-step process to take cellulose into ethanol, and currently the way that was being facilitated was by enzymes that people were making in a lab, and these synthetic enzymes drove the cost to a cost that was completely unviable in nature. And so scientists had kind of thrown away the possibility that ethanol would ever be viable for our vehicles. But with every problem, there's always an innovation. And when I was about 12 or 13, I made it my goal to innovate around that. And we did. About 3 or 4 years into my lab research, we discovered a bacteria that's grown naturally on waste. And if you genetically modify this bacteria, it actually has the power to mimic all of those enzymes in a much cheaper fashion. In 2008, we successfully, for the first time, converted cellulose into ethanol for about 25 cents a gallon. This is a technology that one day could have the power of running our vehicles for a fraction of the cost of fossil energy. It could power our vehicles in a cleaner manner. Our cars could run more smoothly and the environment and the economy could be helped. And so I became very passionate about bioethanol. I became very passionate about innovating in the clean energy space. I thought there was a lot of room to grow. I thought there was a lot of room to improve. In 2008, when we finally converted cellulose into ethanol for the first time, I wanted to see it applied to the real world. I remember wanting to work at a biotech company. Companies like DuPont and Syngenta were the ones innovating around clean energy. They were the ones that were commercializing it and manufacturing it at the scale necessary to run our vehicles. I remember trying to think about how do I work at a biotech company. I'm 14 years old, and I thought, I'll just apply to a program. I'll apply to work for a job, but there's no job applications for 14-year-olds for big companies like that. And so I thought I would do the same thing that I did a few years ago. I would just email every single person I could find and see who responds to me, see who would let me in, and see who would let me work there. But this time it was very difficult to find their email addresses. Finding the email addresses of anybody in industry, as many of you guys have found, is a lot more difficult than finding the email addresses of people in academia. I remember spending about 2 weeks writing down the name of every single person I could find that worked at a biotech company. Every single person. It was hundreds and hundreds of names. And next to every single name, I put every possible iteration of their email address. First name dot last name at company, first initial last name at company. And I sent every single one of those thousands of email addresses the same exact note, saying that I was very passionate as the technology I built, and if I could have the honor of seeing if this is viable commercially, then I'd be very grateful. One by one, these emails started to bounce back. An executive from DuPont emailed me back. He asked if we could chat on the phone, and we did. And I remember having a really good phone call with him, telling him really passionately about the technology that we had created in upstate New York. And at the end of the conversation, he asked me, "So how old are you?" And I said, I proudly said 14. And he was like, "No, sorry, you have to be 16 years old in order to work here." But this time I wasn't letting him say no to me. I said, "My legal standing in the United States does not change if I'm 16 or 14. My abilities as a 14-year-old, you cannot pigeonhole into not being adequate enough to work for you. And I want to work for you. I think I'm ready to work for you right now." And I don't know if he was annoyed with me. I don't know if he was actually believing me, but he let me work for him. And I spent the summer of 2008 working at DuPont. Over the course of that summer, I was able to tweak a technology that DuPont had created to create bioethanol from cellulose. And in a few months, they're breaking ground on a $3.6 billion factory in Texas using the technology that we worked on. So, those 5.5 years were some of the most interesting, some of the most stimulating years of my entire life. I spent 5.5 years running out of a lab whenever there was a safety inspection because I wasn't allowed to be there. I spent 5.5 years being able to mentor graduate students, mentor undergraduate students when I was not even a teenager, because I was interested in teaching and learning. And probably most importantly, I became very passionate about biofuels, a topic that most kids don't become interested in. But I found a passion in my life to commercialize this technology. One day I want to start a company around biofuels and make it public, make the ability for every one of you guys to be able to fuel your vehicles with bioethanol. And I'm starting to make strides towards that. Last year I received Peter Thiel, one of the founders of PayPal alongside Elon Musk, paid 20 students $100,000 to drop out of school. I had started at Harvard when I was very young, when I was 15, and in my third year of school, I received one of these fellowships and took a leave of absence from school. And for the last year, I've been learning all of the skills to create a company, and I'm hoping to start my own energy company within the next year. And the thing I want to end with today is that, the technology that I got to work on was amazing, and the people that I got to interact with were incredible and inspiring, and the awards that I got were very humbling. But what's really affected me the most has been the journey that I've taken to get here. Not letting my age ever be a hindrance. I was laughed at several times. And society today puts rules and status quos on what a certain age is capable of. And I would encourage all of you guys, youngsters and parents who have their kids, that if you can just leap above these boundaries, if you can never think of a rule as actually a rule, but more of a guideline or suggestion, then any age, any gender, any demographic can innovate at any time in their life.